One second. Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to our ADPList View from the Top series in October. So today we have someone really special here. But before that, I just want to say thank you all for taking out your time today to join us at this session with Rajan, who is a very special guest and someone who I consider one of the smartest people that I've met in my life. And it's definitely an honor to be hosting him here. So I will just do a little bit of introduction about what this session is going to be about from View from the Top. And obviously, I'm going to introduce Rajan and he'll introduce himself. But I just want to share a little bit about View from the Top. So View from the Top is a monthly series exclusively hosted for ADPList mentors, where we invite visionary leaders from around the world to share their experience on careers, leadership, and stories that they have been through that are, sort of like better scarred and tested. And so today we are very excited and very honored as well to have Rajan here with us. Thank you so much, Rajan, for joining here at the ADPList Mentor Club for this October series. We're super excited to have you, and we think we have a lot to learn from you today, not just as the Managing Director of Sequoia Capital India, but also as the ex-VP of Google India and Southeast Asia, and the ex-Managing Director of India and VP at Dell, and then also yourself as an investor and an individual as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. And obviously, I will give you some time to introduce yourself in case I sort of like miss anything out. But yeah, go for it, Rajan. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Felix, for inviting me. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. First and foremost, I'm super excited to be here. We are very fortunate to have, Felix, and I see James is also here, and the ADP as a company actually in our current cohort of Surge, which is a Sequoia seed stage program. And I must say, I'm just amazed to see, I think, the growth that the company is having, and especially sort of the engagement and the vibrancy on the platform. So thank you for being mentors on ADP. I hope it's been fulfilling to all of you, but I'm just excited to be here and look forward to the discussion, Felix.
Thank you so much, Rajan. So now I'm sure everyone is really excited, and in case anyone hasn't heard what I just mentioned about Rajan's profile, he is currently leading investments at Sequoia Capital India as a managing director. But before that, he has been in 3 major big tech companies: Google, Dell, and as well as Microsoft, and in which all he's holding extremely high position as a leader there. And so definitely he has been in this industry for a very long time. But perhaps Rajan, let's start with leadership, right? Because that's where sort of your past, I would say, decades of experience comes from, right? Let's start with leadership. How would you describe your own style of leadership in your own words?
Yeah, I think so. By the way, first of all, I realize that all of you are, I guess, almost all of you are designers, and so that's not something I know anything about. Although I love great design when I see it, but I have no idea how you guys do what you do. So continue to keep doing your magic. Look, so I think my leadership style, look, it's like everything else in life, right? It evolves over a period of time. I started my career at McKinsey, which is a management consulting firm. I was with McKinsey in Chicago, and I spent 11 years there. So there I learned how to manage and lead small teams, because consulting teams tend to be small, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe people, and then once you become a partner, you're managing maybe 5 teams. So maybe you've got maybe like 30, 40 people at a time. So those tend to be small teams, and then how you lead a small team in a consulting team is very, very different to how you would lead a much larger scale operation, right? So then I went to Dell. And then within my first year at Dell, I ended up sort of managing all of global offshoring, which was literally thousands of people spread across 30, 40 centers all over the world. People working in call centers, in IT centers, in back office operations. And that was wholly different, right? So I had to become a very, very different kind of leader. And then also the other thing is, company to company, what is expected of leaders changes quite a bit. Right? Different styles, different approaches, different values. And so as I went from Dell to Microsoft, I had to adapt my style. And then when I came to Google, I had to adapt my style. So I think the only constant about leadership, it is constantly evolving. And I think successful leaders are able to adapt to the environment very well, right? And it takes time to adapt, because especially if you've been at a company for a long time, you go into a new company, and some of the tenets are still the same. I mean, many of the tenets are the same, but you actually have to adapt your style a fair bit. So I'd say, Felix, it's not a simple answer, other than especially for many of you, I see. I can only see about 6 of you on the screens. I guess the rest of you, don't have your videos on, but many of you have, many decades of leadership ahead of you, if that's what you want to do. And keep in mind that, you'll evolve and you'll change. And it's really important, by the way, to get feedback when you become a leader, because feedback is very important for everybody, but especially as a leader, because your teams will tell you what you're good at, and also what you need to change.
Thanks so much, Rajan. So, talking about feedback, right? I'm curious, where did that word, feedback, fit into the leadership style of yours? Where did that come from? Was it from your career? Was it from your childhood? Where is that style, and where did you find it?
Yeah, I think I don't think it was. I suppose growing up, you get a lot of messages, right? I mean, I grew up in a household where my dad was a sportsman, and I was terrible at sports. So I got a lot of feedback on how to get better at sport. But I would say, look, it kind of got kind of in many ways hard coded into me at McKinsey, right? Because much like any other consulting firm, you get a lot of feedback from your clients, you get a lot of feedback from your teams, you get a lot of feedback from your partners when you're in your early days. I mean, every 3 months you're getting feedback, right? It's a pretty structured feedback and review process. But I would say, as a leader, my first big wake-up call from a feedback standpoint was I had joined Dell. I was working for Michael Dell, and then while I was doing that, I took over this sort of very large-scale operational role of managing all offshoring centers for Dell. And and Dell, Microsoft, Google, all these companies, and those of you that work for larger companies would know this, and we also talk about this to our early stage companies at Surge. 360-degree feedback for managers and leaders is a very, very good thing. And I remember getting my first 360-degree feedback, and it was god awful. I'd never seen anything like it, because at McKinsey, I was actually a pretty good leader. My teams loved working for me. I was sought after, etc. And, at Dell, I got my first 360-degree feedback, and it was absolutely horrendous. Because, and as I reflected on it, what I learned was, I hadn't adapted my style. When you're leading teams of tens of thousands of people, I mean, at the time it was like 20,000 people, and very different type of talent, right? I mean, you can imagine leading, teams of McKinsey, small teams of 5 or 10, McKinsey associates and engagement managers versus, call center managers who each manage, 1,000 people each, right? Folks on call centers and back office operations. I mean, those are whole different things, right? I mean, most of them had no idea what I was saying because I was talking in sort of these complex frameworks and in a terminology that, nobody. So I had to sort of just, it was the whole thing was like, they had no idea what I was talking about. Yeah. And I didn't understand how to communicate sort of to thousands of people, right? And this importance of repetition and so on and so forth. And also, like, you have to connect with these folks in very, very different ways. And and ever since then, I've been a big believer of feedback. In fact, after I joined Sequoia India, at Google, we used to do this thing called Google Geist. I don't know whether we have any Googlers here. I know there are quite a number of Googlers on ADPList, but I was a big fan of Google Geist, which was sort of I think it used to be run twice a year, and maybe then we moved to once a year before I left, which is 2 years ago. But it was basically a way to get a pulse of the team. And as part of Google Geist, you also get manager feedback. And I found this Google Geist to be very important. So Felix, I instituted, and I call it Surge Geist. So once a year, we run a Surge team engagement survey. Yeah. And one of the questions we ask is, what do you think of the Surge leadership, which is basically Shailendra and myself? Wow. And we get great feedback of what the team thinks of us. And we use that feedback to get better. So I think for those of you, especially who are managing teams, who are leading teams, constantly seek out feedback, because you'd be amazed at what that does, number one, for your own development, because you'll hear what you're good at. And by the way, it's tough, right? I mean, when you get when you create an environment in your teams that is psychologically safe, meaning people are willing to speak their minds and they bring their full self to work, they will tell you exactly what they think of you, right? What they think you're good at, what they think you're not very good at, what you need to improve at. And it's very difficult to take that feedback, by the way. But what I'd encourage all of you to do is be very open to it. I've always believed that feedback is a gift, right? If somebody's willing to give you feedback, you may not agree with it, by the way, and many times you may not agree with it. That's okay. Hear them out, thank them for the feedback, and then reflect on it. And what you'll find is that you may not agree with some of it, but a lot of it is probably things that you need to get better at.
Thanks so much, Rajan. I mean, definitely we all get, cutting edge feedback every single quarter and every single week as well. So thanks for that. One of the things is that, throughout one of the things you mentioned early on in your career is that you mentioned Michael Dell, which is obviously one of the best tech leaders of our time, right? He founded, Dell. And you have worked with Michael Dell and also some of the great leaders at Google, including the current CEO, Sundar Pichai. So when you talk about leadership style, have you found, is there anything that you have found from either one of those two leaders that you work with that you embody into yourself or to the team currently? Like, what have you learned from these leaders that you work with that we consider them
look,
like?
I've always taken this approach, Felix, that, you have to learn from all your experiences, right? And, some people, when I was at, Google or Microsoft or Dell, I would have my teams come and tell me, like, oh, I don't like this manager, I don't like that leader, or whatever, right? And my point is, look, I mean, you're going to have many, many different managers and leaders you're going to have to work with, right? And the key thing is try to learn from everybody, and then over time you'll figure out, right, what best, what do you want to learn and embrace in your own style, and other things that you may never want to do. So I'll take two examples. I mean, like I've worked with so many great leaders, right? But Michael is an entrepreneur, right? Michael Dell started Dell. He started building Dell, and I spent a lot of time with him when I joined Dell. And what I learned from Michael was just being absolutely relentless, right? To be a very successful entrepreneur, you just have to be relentless for basically 30 years. You never take no for an answer. You just keep going. And sort of I learned that from Michael, right? Which is, you can't just give up, right? Now you have to change strategy, you change course. You change your strategy, you change your tactics, but you can't give up on the goal. So I think I really learned that from Michael. The second thing I learned from Michael, and actually several of the Dell leaders, when I was there, the president of the company was a guy called Kevin Rollins, was just maniacal operational detail, right? If you want to be great at execution, you got to love detail, right? You got to really, really love detail. I mean, if you're the kind who gets bored with detail, you're not going to be a great operating leader, right? So, and by the way, great leaders are, are both strategic and very operational, right? You can't be a terrific, especially, if you're in a company, in a sort of a commercial enterprise, right? You have to be very good at both of those things. And now you may be better at one of the two. You may be more strategic than you're operational, but if you're very strategic, but you don't like operations, you're going to be a terrible leader, right? So that's what I learned from, that's what I learned from, I mean, I learned many things from Michael, but those were some of the things. I would say Sundar, I spent a lot of time with Sundar Pichai. Before he became CEO, he was head of Chrome, then he was head of Android, and then he ran all the product, and then he became CEO. So I spent a lot of time with Sundar in his various capacities, obviously less time after he became CEO because he was, super busy doing lots and lots of different things. But, with Sundar, I learned this very important thing that maybe all of you can think about, which is Sundar is extremely respectful, right? He's extremely respectful. And this idea that, treat people the way that they would like to be treated, right? And one simple philosophy I sort of think that I learned from Sundar is, treat people the way you like to be treated. Do you like it when people are maybe not respectful, or when they're rude, or when they're curt, I mean, of course, I'm not going the extremes of what happens in startup land, right? I'm sure this doesn't happen at ADPList, Felix, but I mean, there are a lot of startups. I see a lot of Indians on this call. I don't know whether they work at startups or big companies, but Indian startups can be culturally quite challenging sometimes, especially with founders who are kind of maybe not very respectful. So I think with Sundar, I really learned that you've got to be respectful. And second, is that you can be a nice guy and you can win, right? I mean, Sundar Pichai is just an extraordinary human being. And look at what he's done, right? I mean, he's took over the company from Larry, and now the company is a $2 trillion market cap company. I think when Sundar became CEO, it was maybe half a trillion dollars, something like that. So but anyway, those are just two leaders. But what I try to do, Felix, as I said, is I try to learn from everybody that I work with, right? And now, as you know, I work very closely with Shailendra. I mean, he's a phenomenal investor, right? And he's a phenomenal leader and I try to learn, learn every day, right? So I have this, by the way, to be a great leader, you have to be a learning machine, right? Learning not just about your business, your function, your teams, but also about what it takes to be a good leader. And that's one sort of simple thing that I've always done, which is learn from every person that you work with. And by the way, there will be many behaviors that you would look at and say, I don't want to ever be like that. And that's fine, by the way. That's learning, right? You just say, look, I don't want to ever do that. That's cool, right? But at least now you know that that's something that you don't ever want to do. And some of those experiences are also very useful because you kind of learn, I don't want to ever go there. I don't want to ever be like that.
Right. Thanks so much, Rajan. I feel like these stories are still so fresh and it feels so alive when you talk about it with so much emotions. Now, when we talk about your past track record, right? I want to talk a little bit about your very interesting journey to where you are today. Talking a little bit, just a little bit of throwback. You were born in Sri Lanka. India is now home to you, and you moved to the States to study at MIT and then Stanford. Obviously, these two are the best schools in the world. Which I believe, back in the time when you enrolled in MIT, which is the late 1980s, it must have been a huge privilege. How did that exposure to international culture shape you, not just your leadership style, but also your worldview? How does that, international culture shape your worldview? And is that important for leaders to have?
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, I think much like all of you, I was very fortunate. I think all of you on this call are very fortunate. That's why, you're doing what you're doing and, you're living in an age where you can be mentoring anybody from anywhere. But look, what I learned at MIT was very simple, right? That there are literally millions of people who are smarter than I am. Well, there were that, it wasn't millions, but there were 1,000 in my freshman class, right? And the thing is, I grew up in Sri Lanka, and I mean, much like all of you, you do pretty. I'm sure most of you, you do very well in school, and you think, you think you're pretty smart, right? And then, I landed up at MIT, and I remember the first course that I took. I mean, like literally, I couldn't believe my score. I was looking at this paper, and I was frozen because it was so low. I had never seen, digits that was so low, right? And from then on, the next 4 years were just basically humbling, right? Because you learn that there are really, really, really smart people in the world, and what MIT really did for me was, it helps you benchmark excellence, right? And this is something I'd like, maybe all of you to think about, right? Make sure that in your career, you seek excellence, and to seek excellence, it's helpful, not necessary, but it's very helpful to be in an environment that is where excellence is mandated, right? So if you look at a school like MIT, by the way, at MIT, you can't be excellent at sport. I mean, we were in the 7th division or whatever, the division that didn't exist. When it came to university sports, we were in a division that didn't exist. I mean, I don't even know what the division is because, like, by the way, no, not that anybody cared. We didn't care, right? But when it came to, engineering or science or academics, it really was, a place where you saw excellence, right? And so what I learned really at MIT was excellence. Then I went to grad school. I saw a very different kind of, like, that you can be excellent and cool. Like Stanford, like MIT is excellent, in engineering, and Stanford is like excellent and cool, because MIT, at least, I didn't get to hang out with cool people. I mean, I love my buddies from there, but like, but then, I think when I started working is when you really realize how to operate in a multicultural, I mean, really a US environment, right? I mean, I was in the Midwest, in Chicago. So you kind of learn, but I think this notion of excellence is a very important thing, right? And I've always sought excellence, right? Which is I want to work in environments that are truly, that value excellence, right? Because that is what pushes your game, right? Because if you're the smartest person in the room, and by the way, you think you're the smartest person and you genuinely are the smartest. Now, by the way, there are a lot of people who think they're the smartest person in the room, but they're not. I mean, that's a problem. and they're not just fun to be around, but if you're, when you're in an in an environment that is truly world class, right? Like at Google, I mean, everybody was smarter than I was, like everybody, and that's an amazing thing, right? Because at Sequoia, Felix, you and some of your team members, you get to work with, several of our, engage with several of our Sequoia team members, right? I mean, our 25-year-olds are smarter than I am. I mean, that is fantastic, because what it does is it pushes you, it develops you, right? And one thing you have to do as a leader, by the way, is you cannot be, what's the word that's used, right? Where you're worried that, others will get ahead of you, right? I mean, that's one very important thing. You cannot have insecurities, by the way. It's very important to be a very successful leader. You can't be insecure, especially about your skills, right? So my assumption is that I am not the smartest person in the room. My assumption is that everybody is much, much smarter than they are. And as a leader, what you have to do is you have to harness that potential. You have to focus it, you have to harness it, you have to channel it, and you have to just let it go. Meaning let it go as in unleash enormous potential onto, whatever the set of goals are, right? So and by the way, this was the transition I had to make from McKinsey to Dell, because at McKinsey, I really got paid to come up with the answer as a McKinsey partner, right? Sorry, that's my dog. But at Dell, I got paid to hire the right people and ask the right questions and have them come up with the answers and have them own the results, because otherwise they won't own the results, right? Yeah. If in an operating environment, if you come up with the answer, your team is not going to own that answer, and they're not going to own the execution of that as well as if they came up with the answer, right? So anyway, it's a long answer to your question, but that's sort of, those are just some thoughts. Strive for excellence.
So yeah, thanks so much for that, Rajan. I hear that a lot, and surround yourself with excellence and benchmark. And I hear that, and I learned that actually first from you. So thanks for sharing that. So I want to dive into a deeper part of leadership, which is people's management. A lot of mentors here today, they will either be promoted or they are already at a position where we have to manage direct reports or those beneath, the organizational chart, as well as, managing upwards, right, to our manager, to our bosses, and so on. I mean, you as well, you have to manage your own staffs, your own reports, the founders that you're working with, and so on. What framework, or mental model do you use when thinking about leveraging authority to manage, upwards, downwards, or sideways?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. Well, firstly, each of those things is quite different, right? Sort of managing upwards is very different to managing your teams, and then working with your peers is very, very different. I mean, there are many common elements, but they're quite different, right? Let me start with the easiest one, which is sort of working with your manager, right? Just be very transparent. Bad news must come first. Okay. So it's a very simple thing, right? Just when you have bad news, go there first, right? Because trust is very important, right? At the end of the day, I think with your manager, make sure you agree on goals, what is expected for you and your team to deliver. Right now, we have this framework called OKRs, right? Objectives and key results. One of the reasons I love OKRs is because everybody's aligned on what needs to be delivered, which are basically key results, right? The objectives and key results. So make sure that with your manager, you're aligned on, what results you need to deliver. And then secondly, do the things that build trust, communicate often, communicate clearly, communicate with transparency. And finally, look, and at the end of the day, deliver results, right? What does your manager really want from you? Okay. I mean, it's very simple. They just want you to deliver the results consistently every quarter on quarter. That's all. Now you do that for 4 or 5 quarters, you've got trust. You've earned your manager's trust, right? And once you have trust, you could pretty much do whatever you want, because, and that's what great relationships are, right? Between a manager and a direct report. Now moving to actually managing your teams, right? I think it's very important that you have a vision of where you'd like to take your team, right? Now, you could be leading a function like a design team, you could be the founder, you could be, you could be running product or engineering, but, have a vision of where you want to go, okay? People don't get inspired by tasks and sprints and activities. People get inspired by, a vision of where you'd like to go, right? Now, by the way, there's a company vision, so you should reiterate that with your team. Where does the company want to go? We worked a lot with Felix and the team on sort of the ADP mission and vision and all that, right? But then, even within your function, you should have a vision, right? Which is, where do you want to go, right? So that's number one. Second, look, make sure that you set some goals, right? So that the team understands what they need to do and how they will be measured. Third, hire great talent, because without great talent, you're going to end up doing their work. And when you do their work, you're going to be miserable. You won't have time to actually think. You won't have time to do anything else, right? And then finally, look, make sure that you empower your teams, right? So at the end of the day, if you have to micromanage your teams, one of two things are going on, okay? Either you have the wrong people on your team, or somebody hasn't told you not to be a micromanager. And by the way, the fastest way to find out is do a 360-degree feedback survey. In fact, there's one thing you can do next week. Those of you that are managing teams, if you've never done a leadership 360-degree feedback, you can just go, actually, you can probably get that survey from Mesh. It's one of our search companies right now, or there are many other places where you can get it. Just do it, because your teams will tell you that you're a terrible micromanager. So if you're micromanaging, you've got to learn how to, and by the way, it's very hard to do, right? Especially if you're a new manager, because you want to be in all the details, you want to control all the outcomes. Well, the reality is, then you're not going to be able to scale, right? And then the last thing is, look, give your team feedback often, but that is very objective and very specific, right? So like here's a statement that makes absolutely no sense from performance. You didn't do well. Like, what does that mean? What do you mean I didn't do well? No, that doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah.
So let's get specific. What is it that they did not do? This goal was not met, and because these three things didn't happen. And by the way, this is maybe what you could have done differently. Now that is feedback, right? So learning how to give feedback, being very transparent, all these things. So it's not one specific thing, but I would say visionary leaders who are very clear on where they want to go, what the goals are, who hire great talent, who empower them, and who are very clear and transparent with feedback, generally build very good teams, right? And probably the last thing I'd say is, look, it's very important for you to create what I call a psychologically safe environment. Simple way to think about it is, does everybody speak their mind? Right? Does everybody on your team speak their mind? If they disagree with you, do they say it? Are they comfortable saying it in your team, in your group, right? If they think that this is a really bad idea, do they say it? Right? And by the way, it's very difficult to build that environment. But man, when you build a psychologically safe environment of high performers who are aligned to some set of goals or OKRs, magic happens. Just magic.
Thanks for sharing that. This really brings me to my next question, which I think, you talk a lot about psychologically safe. You talk a lot about communication and empowerment. I want to touch on it a little bit more, right? It's specifically around creating a culture which is diverse and inclusive. But I want to focus, companies talk about diversity, and then we hire people of, different cultures, different races. But I want to focus a little bit more on the inclusive part, where this is, where it includes like open communication, where people feel like they belong and have a voice regardless of where they are in the org chart. And, I've heard amazing things about you, Rajan, from Peter, right? Which is, by the way, for context for everyone here, Peter is another Sequoia investor who I work closely with. I heard from Peter on how you respect everyone's point of view before you make any investment calls, or making any decision, which I really found it, to be incredible. Like, what is that mental model behind that? How can we be like you? How can we foster a culture like that where it's like safe? Are there any, actionable steps that, you feel like leaders can do to do that? Because I find that story from Peter really amazing when he mentioned that about you.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind of Peter. Look, I think it really boils down to this notion that you're not the smartest person in the room and you don't have all the answers, right? So, by the way, if you genuinely believe that, you're going to listen to everybody, right? Look, at the end of the day, you have a team, you've assembled a team, hopefully because you think they're really, really talented, right? By the way, if you don't think they're very, very talented and committed, please go change them. Because otherwise you're wasting your time, they're wasting their time, and you're creating a really unhappy environment, right? So if you really have, hired well and you've groomed well, and you should listen to everybody, what everybody needs to do. But by the way, at the end of the day, as a leader, you also need to make decisions, right? So you listen to everybody. And the key thing is when some of your team members disagree with you, right? The question is, how do you react to that? Do you shut them down? Or do you listen to them but not really pay any attention? Or do you really engage and try to understand why they disagree with you? And by the way, what you'll find is, more often than not, They may be right and you may be wrong. And are you willing to change your view? And that is the crux of it, right? Are you willing to change your view? And what happens with a lot of folks, especially really, really smart people, is they're just too stubborn. They don't want to change their view. And quite frankly, they're not even listening, right? They will ask their team, what you think? People start, sort of talking about it, but they're not really listening. And so that's the key, right? And a lot of it is, look, just listen and genuinely listen, right? And be open-minded. But do keep in mind, as a leader, you got to make the call. So you have to decide.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Rajan. I really, I 100% agree with that. I have one quick question coming up from what you just talked about. I think trust is sort of like this operating system around, this entire thing that they just mentioned. I've always have this question, is trust earned or is trust given first and then thereafter like taken away? So do you believe
I think it's a great question, right? Look, I think when you hire somebody new, hopefully you've taken a huge amount of time and been very, very thorough and rigorous about before you hire this person, right? He or she. But if you haven't done that, by the way, you're not building a great team, right? I mean, you have to be very selective. You have to be very rigorous. You have to make sure that you're hiring the right people. But once you've hired that person, guys, you have to trust them. You have trust day zero, right? Because otherwise, like, well, what's the point? Why did you waste all this time? Now, by the way, that's not to say you should, trust them and let them go forever, right? You should trust them, right? You should empower them. They should, let them, but also, by the way, you should be very clear on deliverables, right? One of the things that happens sometimes in early stage companies is nobody knows what they're accountable for. They don't know what the deliverables are, so they don't know how to go deliver. Right? That's not a great place to be, because then at the end of the quarter or end of the month, you're having a chat and you're like, you didn't deliver, but like nobody knew what to deliver, right? So I think you've got to give the trust, but then over a period of time, right? Once your team members who deliver consistently deliver quarter after quarter after quarter, they gain a lot of trust. And the same thing is for all of you, right? I mean, you all know this. With your leadership teams, right? Whoever you report to, whether it's CEO of the company, some of you may be founders, right? You gain a lot of trust with your leaders. Consistent, predictable delivery for leaders, especially functional leaders, line leaders, general managers. By the way, founders with their board, right? Felix, once you get your Series A investment and you have to create a board, you're going to learn about this, right? Predictable delivery of results is what builds trust, right? And for instance, right, you can build trust if you're forthcoming and very, very quick with bad news, instead of trying to hide it and hoping it'll get better. That builds trust. Whereas if you hide things, and hoping things will get better, that doesn't build trust, because, whether they say it or not, whoever you're reporting to will sort of say, I mean, how come this person didn't come to me when it happened?
Right. Thanks so much for that, Rajan. So, one of the things that I really wanted to ask you, just to follow up with all these questions, last two questions before we open up the floor to, the audience, you mentioned, you kind of like, mentioned that, most good leaders obviously has these certain traits that you talk about, be it, fostering trust, empowering the team members, and knowing and being aware that, you are not the smartest in the room. As your role in leadership position through so many years, how do you actually sort of like throw out, this sort of like set of thinking to the rest of your colleagues, right? Because you have clearly seen the benefits of this set of thinking, awareness, trust, and whatnot. How do you actually pass this down to your colleagues and staff or founders? Do you direct them? Do you write like a monthly newsletter? How do you pass this down to the rest of your staff and founders and the people that you work with?
Yeah. Hey, can you give me 1 second? My battery is about to die. Just give me 1 second. Okay.
All right. Yeah. So meanwhile, everyone, you can put in your questions on the chat. All right. So Oliver, okay, got everyone's question. All right. So we are going to take about 10 minutes for Q&A after this, so that you guys can put in your question.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I think, look, basically you have to live the things that you talk about, right? So if you say, look, we want to create an open, safe environment and everybody should speak their mind. When the first set of your team members start speaking their mind and they completely disagree with you, if you shut them down, you're not living your values, right? If you say, hey, look, we want to start, we want to start meetings on time and end meetings on time, but you're always 10 minutes late. Your whole company is going to be 10 minutes late. You know, if you say that, look, being respectful to every team member is very important, but if you lose your temper or you lose your cool, or if you are rude to people, or if you're, if you cut people off, right? See, basically, Felix, a leader has to bring their A game to work every single day. Just because you had a bad evening at home with your family doesn't mean you can treat your team badly in the morning. You got to leave it at home and you got to bring your A game to work. And by the way, it's really hard. That's why being a great leader is very, very hard, right? You've got to put that aside. Now, by the way, you should be upfront with your team, say, hey, look, I had a really bad evening. So sorry, guys, I may not be exactly what I want to be, but you can't then go crazy on the team because you had a bad night. Because what did they do? They didn't do anything for it, right? So I think the most important thing is, look, you have to live. You have to be the model. You have to be that role model, right? Because if you're not that role model, those are the behaviors your team is going to adopt. Your team is going to look at how you behave, what you do, what you say, and how you act. And that is exactly how they will replicate.
Gotcha. Thanks so much for that, Rajan. So one last question before I go into a lot of great questions from the crowd. And I think this is a little bit more about your own, sort of like worldview, right, of where the world is heading. You have been such a great advocate for the India's, tech and startup ecosystem. Quite in fact, at ADPList, over 500 of our mentors, or even more than that today, are from India. So I'm personally very excited as well. And so I'm curious, like, how has your view changed on India's ecosystem today? Like, what is the difference between India's tech ecosystem versus, the rest of the world, maybe in Silicon Valley and in Southeast Asia? And what are you seeing, right? What makes you so bullish about this particular ecosystem here today?
Yeah, I mean, look, by the way, first of all, I mean, every ecosystem, today, around the world, right? I mean, startups are booming. I mean, you pick a country that you'd like, startups are happening, right? Just within Sequoia and Surge, we've invested in companies in Philippines, we'll soon have a company in Malaysia. I mean, like pretty much every country, Vietnam, we have many, Indonesia, we have many, and so on and so forth, right? So, and I'm just talking about India and so every country is sort of booming today, right? Now, every country has its unique aspects. I think what excites me about India today is that, we are beginning to see truly unique business models that the world has never seen before, right? So in our actually, like for instance, and not just India, but if you look at our region of India, Southeast Asia, which is where I invest, like ADPList, right? I mean, there's never really been a platform like ADPList at your scale that is truly global from day zero. By the way, I'm sure, Felix, you probably told your mentors, right? I mean, you're in Singapore and your co-founder is in Ghana and you guys have never met. And you're building ADPList. I mean, holy my God, that's amazing, right? I mean, that is spectacular. So I think seeing new business models that we have never seen, in your cohort, you have Absolute, which is an ag tech company in India, which basically, can improve farmer yields by 20 to 30%. Look, if you can improve farmer yields by 20 to 30%, and you can do that at scale, you can change the livelihoods of 3 billion people. Okay, so that is massive, right? Which is basically, 40% of the world, because 40% of the world is dependent on agriculture. So I think what excites me about India is many things, but especially now we are beginning to see business models in India, in agriculture, in health, in education, in electric vehicles, in, pick your favorite space, right? Where innovation is really now beginning to impact, sort of the real India, right? Which is, 1 billion people. So I call these sort of population scale innovations, right? Population scale innovations. So, like an Absolute Foods is basically a population scale play, right? It's going to impact like billions of people. So I think that's what really excites me.
Thanks so much for that, Rajan. Now, with that said, I'm going to open up the floor to Q&A. I've already picked a couple of questions and I'm going to call your name. And obviously, if your name is called, please unmute yourself and then you can ask a question. Now, I think there's a very good question from Oliver. Oliver, can you unmute yourself if you're here to speak on your question? Yep, I gave you the permission to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, Oliver, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yes, my camera's not working, doing very well today. So it's 7 a.m. in Vancouver.
No, perfectly understand. I was just kidding. Go ahead.
So my question is, when one's hiring, should you hire for someone that has all the skills that you need, or should you hire for someone that can learn those skills and maybe has other complementary skills?
Yeah, I think it's not one or the other, Oliver. I mean, I like to think of four different attributes you should look for in every hire, or in at least most hires that you make. One is sort of capability, which is what you're talking about, right? You're hiring somebody to do sales. They better have sold before, otherwise they're going to learn how to sell on your books, right? And that's especially challenging, by the way, if you're an early stage startup, because you want to hire people who are sort of specialists, not generally. So that's one. The second is commitment. Right, very, very important. Look, especially depending on the stage of company that you're in. If you're in a startup, the reality is you're going to be working 7 days a week. So if somebody wants to only work 5 days a week and work 9 to 4, that's probably not like for your company if you're a startup, right? Whereas it may be better, it may be okay if you're in a large company and you guys do work 9 to 5, right? So I think commitment, you can define it different ways. The third is cultural fit, super, super important. Right? Every company has a set of values that are deeply important to them. Make sure that you're really trying to dig in and understand, will this person fit into our culture, right? Whatever your set of values are. And it's hard to do, but that's why rigorous interviewing is very, very important. And then the last one, Oliver, is is really learnability, right? And it is very important to find people who can learn, especially if you're in a fast growing company, either a very fast growing large company or very, even early stage company, early stage startup, because, things are going to change a lot, right? So you want somebody who's very agile, and the ideal role, ideally, you should be looking for all four of those, right? Somebody who's very capable, who's highly committed, who can fit into your culture, and who's a learning machine. And that's what I look for, by the way. And that's why it's really, you have to take your time to hire. Please, all of you, don't hurry in a hire. In a hurry. Don't hire in a hurry, right? Hiring in a hurry is a really bad idea. And by the way, all of you will get pushed to do that, right? Your managers are going to say, hey, how come this person has come on board? Well, you're going to take your time. I'll give you an example. Okay, when I joined Google, I didn't have an assistant for a year, because I don't know how many of you work at Google, but to be an assistant, an executive assistant at Google, you have to pass a test. And I couldn't find anybody who could pass this test. It's a damn hard test. It's crazy. I mean, it's a really hard test. Okay, so finally a year later, and I literally had 50 assistants, like the best assistants in India, working at other companies, go through this test. None of them could pass the test. And I was like, oh my God, this is such a bad idea, right? So finally, I had, fortunately, one of my colleagues who was in ops comes up to me one day and says, hey, look, I'd love to do this. And I'm like, really? But you're doing ops. Why would you want to do this? He's like, hey, look, I want to do it. It'll be great. Be new learning. After she takes a test, she kills the test. And then she becomes my assistant. Guess what? After the first week with me, she comes to me and says, Rajan, you're spending your time all wrong. I'm like, what do you mean? She says, look at your OKRs and look at how you're spending your time. She had done a whole time series analysis comparing how I was spending my time with our OKRs. Man, was that worth waiting a year for? Absolutely. And after that, I became the biggest fan of this test. That's my point. Have a high bar of the talent that you're going to hire, because, man, it's going to take you time to hire, but once you hire those folks, they're going to change your life and you're going to change your company.
Thanks so much for that, Rajan. Oliver, I hope he answered your question. I hope Rajan answered your question. All right, the next question, right, before I pick the last few, is from Anuj. Anuj is actually a growth hacker and himself, and has worked with Sean Ellis, which is a very famous growth hacker.
Hey, Anuj, I know Anuj. Is Anuj from Boston?
Yeah. Yes, he's in Boston. Anuj, let me just give you the permission to unmute yourself. All right, go for it.
Anuj, you're mute. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Anuj. Okay, try again.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, sorry. Hey, Rajan, there was no way I was going to miss this. I guess my question comes down to culture, because I'm a firm believer that without the right culture, everything falls apart. So I'm very curious, you've had experiences at so the best companies in the world, like what's been the most unique sort of cultural aspect you've encountered in any of these companies, one or more? How did they put it into practice, right? And
yeah,
I think
more importantly, but I'll tell you one that always amazed me, and we try to inculcate this with our search founders, right? So for those of you that, and some of you may have read the Google book, so you know about this, but Larry and Sergey ran Google for basically 19 years, right? And every Friday they used to have a TGIF, and then it became Thursday because it became global. They were there every single Friday for an hour, except for the week of Christmas, for the all hands of the company. So Google, from the time Google had 5 or 10 people all the way through 120,000 people, would have a TGIF every single Friday. And by the way, it's an all hands, right? It's not a TGIF, come have a beer. There was beer afterwards, but It was basically 1 hour of content. And these two founders showed up every single time. I mean, it was crazy, except for the week of Christmas and the week of Thanksgiving. I mean, the commitment, right? And by the way, I hear from our founders who are like literally seed stage. They've been up and running for 6 months. They're like, oh gosh, I'm tired. You're tired after 6 months? Larry and Sergey did it for 19 years. And by the way, what was amazing about this meeting, number one was the fact that they showed up. But number two was that in that meeting, anybody could get up and ask any question. So I had we would have engineers lining up, questioning Larry and Sergey about why they made a specific decision. And many of them would go to say, we would never make that decision. Why did you make it? Now that is magic. That shows that you've created an open, and by the way, now that has changed because, obviously in the last 2 or 3 years, things have really spun out of control, right? With all the political challenges, with China, with the Defense Department. So some of this has changed at Google, but I think this idea that anybody can ask the toughest questions of the founders or the CEOs of the most senior leaders of that function and not worry about their job or not worry about being reprimanded. I think that is magical, right? So look, there are many examples, but I think that one I specifically like.
Thank you so much, Rajan. All right, the next person that we have on the list, which is the last Q&A before we wrap up for today, is by Ellen. Ellen, go for it. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you a lot for sharing the experiences. I really love the striving for excellence and then be respectful. My question is really around what were some very tough leadership decisions you made in the past, and maybe something that you could have done differently if you were given a second chance? Because we learn a lot from our mistakes or experiences, and we grow really fast. I'm just curious from your perspective with all these different companies, what were some memorable decisions that you could have done differently?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, by the way. Look, the thing that I found hardest as a leader was to let people go, to ask people go, either for performance reasons or because the business was being restructured. So when I was at Dell, over a weekend, I had to restructure a business and let 5,000 people go.
Wow.
So for those of you that really struggle and are traumatized because you have to ask one underperformer go, try 5,000 over a weekend. Come up with names, get your managers together. Because by the way, it was a cost exercise, right? Look, I don't want to ever go through that again. By the way, it's not once. I did it many times. I had to do. I was leading the McKinsey internet practice in the late 1990s. During the first internet bubble boom and bust. And then I was leading the internet practice in Chicago, and I built up a large team of just world-class talent, right? Architects, engineers, product managers, designers, marketeers. And then basically the bubble burst in March of 2000, right? And I had to restructure that team. And I had to let go some incredible talent. So I'd say, look, the hardest thing for me and the thing that, in each of those cases, one thing I learned is be in companies that are going to grow a lot and don't overhire. Because if you overhire, when the business turns, when the market turns, as a leader, you're going to have to let people go. Right. So this is one thing I worry about startups that, hire hundreds and thousands of people at furious pace. Guess what? The markets are going to turn because markets always turn. And what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to let people go. That's painful. So big lesson I learned is don't overhire and try to work in companies that are actually very, very profitable. Right. Google was 3%, 4% net income. Dell was 3-4% net income. Microsoft was 20. Google was 30. Hey, 30% net income businesses have a lot more cash flow. So, these are the things that I learned. Some of it, I can control because I can decide where I want to work, right?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rajan. I was definitely very shocked when I heard about 5,000 people. Thank you so much for answering the audience question. Now, just to wrap up today's session, I have one last question, which I usually ask the speaker, which we invite, would be, what is one piece of advice that that you have learned in your career that you feel like everyone else would disagree with you on this, but you would still stand firm with this advice? What would that one piece of advice be?
Well, I don't know whether others would disagree, but honestly, I don't care whether people agree with me or not. Look, as a leader, you have to have a strong set of beliefs. Okay. And those beliefs are yours, and those beliefs evolve over time, but they're yours, right? Those are the things that are really, really important to you. And by the way, be open to changing them, because sometimes you believe, like, for instance, right? I'll tell you, I was a very big fan of Jack Welch. I still am. I thought he was the greatest CEO, for 20 years, right? 80s and 90s. He was the CEO of General Electric. None of you have probably heard of him. But Jack Welch was legendary, okay? But there was a Jack Welch style of leadership, okay? It was extremely performance focused. It was extremely in your face. It was extremely bell curve driven, right? For those of you that don't know what bell curve is, stack your team, bottom 5%, you got to manage them out. I thought that was a great way to run companies, right, in the 90s, because when I was at McKinsey, I mean, he was the poster child CEO. But I think after I came to Google, and then I saw different leadership styles like Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, many others, right? I think I've completely changed my mind on that. I think that is a really, really bad way to lead. So meaning like you should not be leading by fear. You should lead through inspiration, right? And so look, I can't tell you sort of one piece of advice other than those of you that are in leadership roles, just keep in mind that it is truly a privilege. Okay, it is truly a privilege, and don't and treat it that way, right? Be grateful, and keep in mind that you're only successful because your teams go above and beyond to deliver for you and the company, right? And just be grateful, keep constantly learning, and most importantly, look, inspire your teams, right? Ask yourself, if you're a manager on this call, if you're a leader, do you inspire your team genuinely, hand on heart? Do you inspire your team? And if the answer is not, please go change that, because nothing else matters. Reading books, all this stuff ain't gonna matter. People want to be led by inspiring, visionary leaders who care for them. And that's really it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rajan, for closing today's session with such an inspiring message. Thank you, Rajan. You have taught us so much on mindfulness, authenticity, and leadership just in a short, less than an hour. And I wish you the best of health to you and your family and the Sequoia team through the rest of the year and next year, and your continuous. And thank you so much for your continuous support for the ADPList community. And thank you so much for being here tonight as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Felix. James, great to see you, and thank you to the ADPList team for having us, and great to see all of you. And thanks everyone for being mentors on the ADPList platform, for doing all the great work that you do. And I hope that all of you discover your own leadership journeys over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you very soon. Thank you. And thank you all for joining. See ya. Bye.